Welcome to Robert Bellissimo at the Movies, where we explore all things cinema. I want to welcome to the show Andrew Nette, who is a Melbourne-based writer of fiction and nonfiction. He is the co-editor of 3 books on the history of post-war pulp and popular fiction: Dangerous Visions and the New Worlds, Radical Science Fiction, 1950 to 1985. Sticking It to the Man, Revolution and Counterculture in Pulp and Popular Fiction, 1950 to 1980, and Girl, Gangs, Biker Boys, and Real Cool Cats, Pulp Fiction and Youth Culture, 1950 to 1980. His writing on film, books, and culture has also appeared in a variety of print and online applications. He writes a regular newsletter under his name on Substack, and he is the co-editor with Samm Deighan on their new book, Revolution in 35 Millimeter: Political Violence and Resistance in Cinema, from the Art House to the Grindhouse. This is between 1960 and 1990. Andrew, welcome. Thanks so much for joining me.
You. Great to be here.
I just wanted to go back before we get into the nitty-gritty of the book. Can you talk a little bit about just how your own love of cinema started to become a serious endeavor for you?
Oh, look, I think I was... Oh, yes, you said you were going to ask me this, and I was thinking back on this. I reckon it probably would go back to my father taking me to go and see James Bond films.
Oh, wow.
In the 1970s. I still remember that, and he would often do it as a surprise on a school night. He'd just say, get your clothes on, we're just going out for a little while. I would never know any, and I'd end up in the city, and we'd end up seeing, a Bond film or, other similar films like that. It was great. And that it continued from there, I think. So I owe it to my father.
Ah, fantastic. And now, I mean, these are all these, politically, the violence is motivated in all of these movies, as a result of politics, of course. Now, when did these kind of movies start to interest you?
Oh, look, I think I've always been interested in how both, for want of a better way of putting it, it's a shorthand, low and highbrow. I mean, how both low and highbrow, or how both art house and grindhouse films treat politics, political themes and political violence. And I suppose the book Revolution in 35 Millimeter is the manifestation of that interest. And I know Samm Deighan, my co-editor, she's very, very interested in this as well.
Right.
And we had got I'd met Samm in Philadelphia, actually, when I was attending that conference I mentioned to you when we were off
the NoirCon, right?
NoirCon, yeah. Which was a sort of a 3-day conference about all things noir, and took place in Philadelphia, and I think now happens in Palm Springs, California. Anyway, I'd met Samm, and we'd become friends on social media, and we were talking about, I suppose, this shared interest in these type of films. And she had the idea for a book about it. And I had done, as you said in the beginning of the show, the introduction, I had already done 3 books for PM Press. That's who Revolution in 35 Millimeters come out with. That's an American sort of publisher. I'd done 3 books with them. And I thought, this is an idea. I was keen to write something that was moving away a bit from the pulp and popular fiction, because I like writing about film as well. And I was keen to sort of expand my, to use a different set of muscles, for want of a better way of putting it. And so and Samm had an idea for this book, so I pitched it to PM, and they were interested, and Samm and I put together a proposal, and that the rest is history.
Well, I heard the two of you in a podcast, and she said the idea actually goes back about 10 years. Is that how far back it goes for you?
No, only the last... No, she must have had the idea for quite a long time.
Okay.
I think we started talking about it, book came out last year, we started talking about 3 years, 2 or 3 years before that.
I see. And, I mean, what what I love so much about the book, and I know that her because I've interviewed her as well. It's too bad she couldn't be here, but maybe I can have her another time. I know she's very, very busy, but what her European art house cinema book, you know, going into so many different countries to see how they explored the war. And then you wind up learning so much about history at the same time. And now here we go, not just in Europe, but we go to so many different countries. So I mean, I was learning things that I didn't know at all. And what just by looking at the structure of the book, I thought, oh my God, this must have been such a challenge to, first of all, find the right people for the different countries, and then for the different movies. So how did that process work? Did you ask people that you both knew for what they were interested in writing, or how did the book kind of form?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think in terms of the content of the book, so the book is, I think, about 14 chapters, 14 longer chapters, and a host of what Sam and I call outtakes, which are much shorter pieces which cover off on directors, themes, films, excuse me, that we didn't have time to cover in longer chapters. In terms of the structure of the book, in terms of what we covered in the book, I mean, there's certain things you had to cover. So, you know, your Gillo Pontecorvo, Costas Gavras Zeds, probably A Bullet for the General by Damiani. I mean, there's certain films and directors that you just couldn't not include in a book like this.
Right.
And then there were certainly then at the sort of higher end of the spectrum, I suppose you put it. And then there were certainly genre bodies of national cinema that we wanted to cover. I mean, Sam wrote a great essay on West German cinema during that period when the Baader Meinhof were at the height of their political activity, and she also did a great piece on Japanese films around that same time, around that Red Army time in Japan. Right. I was very keen to write something about how Italian poliziotteschi mirrored a lot of the themes in the book. So there was stuff we had. So there was that, and then I suppose we sort of wanted to cover the basics, wanted to cover the directors we felt we had to cover, that you couldn't do a book like this and not have. But then we also wanted to make a real effort to think more broadly,
right,
about some of the content. So, for example, there's a terrific essay in the book which is sort of about rape revenge films, which is another aspect of the political violence that we wanted to cover.
Right.
Films like that. And then there was an effort where we sort of went out and tried to find cinema from parts of the world which certainly had huge, cinema cultures, but the cinema of which was maybe not so well known for the readership of the book. So Sam was very keen to sort of find some material from North Africa and Africa. I made a big effort in terms of the South American section of the book. So stuff that maybe had been marginalised, maybe hadn't. Although, as I say, those countries had significant, film industries, and that's something that's worth speculating on. The way that these they have been marginalised, but you cover some of these directors. I mean, there's a guy, Sam. I did a chapter on Pontecorvo. Which includes his 4 films, of which the best known of which, of course, is the Battle of Algiers in '66. Right. And I had covered in that chapter a number of other films about the war of liberation in Algiers. And then, of course, Sam had gone off and was looking at what material we could try and include in the book from Africa and North Africa, and she found, this director, not found because he's Yusuf Chahin, Cairo Station, and he also did a film called Jamila the Algerian, which is it's another one of those films about the war in Algeria, done I think about 1961. So there's so much stuff out there that we managed to sort of get, and we tried to get into the book.
Well, I mean, I thought again, I thought it was so well done, and I really liked everybody's everybody's piece. And I know I touched on the writer who wrote the piece on Zed. Was I was really impressed with how personal it was to him, and how that was something, because he was Greek, and so he really understood that time and how his views on it changed. So he really made himself a part of it without making it all about him. Of course, I really really enjoyed that. And actually, there's a lot I didn't know. Like, that's a film that, for me, is always my impression was that it was always kind of universally praised, and I didn't know that, like, people in the KA at the time thought, "Oh no, you're just doing a thriller. This should have been more radical." I had no idea. I don't know if you knew that. Maybe you probably did.
I had an idea about that, and I mean, I think that's a theme that runs. That's one of the themes that sort of is touched upon every now and again in the book. Is a dominant theme in the book. So the book goes the book covers the period from 1960 to 1990, which is, broadly speaking, toward the end of the war in Algeria, which was a massive political event in Europe in the 1950s. And that was something certainly that I was educated on doing the book.
Right.
I sort of knew this, and I had seen the Battle of Algiers before. I mean, I'll get back to your question about your topic about that Z essay in a moment, and Cahiers de Cinema. But when you realise just what a big deal the war in Algeria was in Europe, I mean, it was the equivalent of Europe's Vietnam during the 1950s. I mean, it was an absolutely huge political issue. You had to have a political position on it. And then the book continues until about 1990, the downfall of the Soviet Union.
Right.
Which is a sort of a type. It comes across, I hope, as a thematically consistent sort of period of cinema. I have to say, it didn't necessarily come across like that when we were doing it. It only sort of came together at the end when I thought, oh yeah, actually, Sam and I both thought, actually, this is a good, solid, thematically consistent body of cinema that covers a whole heap of films that deal with very similar concerns.
Right.
And 68 within that, of course, 1968 is a big year. It's a year that I think has a pretty profound impact in cinema in a lot of ways. One way, although, I mean, of course, you can't pin movements down to specific years, but nonetheless, it has an impact in the sense that it pushes the idea, a different type of film and a different style of directing, more grassroots, more engaged with people. You've got people like the Latin American New Cinema movement who are going, well, look, the director's not some god figure that sits at the top of the film and makes all the decisions. Yeah. They should be making the film in consultation and with the marginalised people and with the marginalised people they're making these films with. So that reverberates globally, I think, to some degree. You sort of see that newer style of filmmaking. Not that I'm saying it hadn't occurred before 68. And the other thing that happens is there's, yes, as you allude in terms of the Cahiers de Cinema and Costas Gavras' Z, there's a movement certainly from a lot of cultural commentators, including the people at Cahiers de Cinema, who are saying, your cinema has to be political, has to be radical, has to take a position, and that's was a criticism they made of quite a few films. I think in the book that we cover was a big criticism they made of Zed.
Right.
And it's interesting watching Zed, and I was thinking about this recently in terms of Gavras' other films. I mean, State of Siege,
yeah.
Of course, Missing,
yeah.
And other films, is that what I like about Gavras, and of course Cahiers de Cinema didn't like this, was that he would tackle quite complex political themes using vehicles like the Policier film, using vehicles like drama, using more popular themes, sort of cinematic forms to tackle quite dense, complex, didactic political issues.
Right.
And Zed is a film that's it's got so much life. It's got this fantastic score. It's so colourful. It moves like a thriller.
Yeah.
But of course, it's tackling a very important, very, very, very serious issue. And yes, Christos Tsiolkas' essay on it. I knew. Christos is a friend of mine in Melbourne. And I knew that he liked Gavris, and I knew he was a fan of Zed. So I thought he would be interested to write about Zed.
Great.
And so he said yes, and he tackles the film from that perspective of discussing its political reception at the time it came out. But of course, he saw it, I think, in the 80s when he was a young sort of migrant Greek boy who was also sort of coming to grips with his sexuality in the 1980s, and he discusses his reception of seeing that in the 80s and then rewatching it, and I suppose he's key and talking about some of the themes in terms of what the Greek diaspora and also, I suppose, sexuality, particularly the Marcel Bouzoufi character in Zed. So it's a great essay.
Yeah.
One of the great essays in the book.
I liked it a lot, and I remember William Friedkin in his memoir saying that Zed was a big influence on French Connection, and
that's interesting.
Yeah, the shooting style, and it's also kind of takes the cop thriller as it was apparently was a big influence on it. But one thing that fascinates me, and I know you and Sam were saying this on other podcasts, is like, the book is not just an index of, these movies from this country and they sort of overthrew these governments and that's it. I mean, they're also different and the violence is also different. So can you talk a little bit about the different forms of political violence that are explored in the book?
Well, I mean, there's I suppose there's different. I mean, that period of 1960 to 1990, that period of political upsurge, if you want to call it that. I mean, we're still in a political period of upsurge, but I mean, it had certain forms, and one form was that post, national liberation movement in Algeria wave of revolutions throughout the South, and the incredible influence that conflict in Algeria had in terms of movements throughout Africa, in terms of the Vietnam War, in terms of radicals, in metropolitan countries as well. So there's that. I suppose there's that theme. There's the other. Of course, there was also a conflict between capitalism and what state socialism, actually existing socialism, whatever you want to call it. That's another of the sort of strands that's running through the book. And I suppose what's that upsurge was global in nature, and of course it happened in the United States and Australia and Great Britain. Movements expressing solidarity with those conflicts in Algeria and Vietnam, with struggles in Algeria and Vietnam, which is, of course, a major theme of a lot of American film in the early 1970s. Kimberly Lindbergh does a great essay about that in the book, about those films that are particularly influenced by that sort of wave of campus revolt in the United States in the late 60s and early 70s.
That was one of my favorite essays as well.
Yeah, it's a great essay. But really also good. What's happening is that there's there's the counterculture, but there's also the growth of those movements around race, sexuality, and other forms of identity, for want of a better way of putting it. Ecological movement, the peace movement, all those sort of movements that are also starting to grow up in those metropolitan countries, Australia, America, from the late 1960s, that come out of the sort of counterculture and come out of that upsurge around the Vietnam War.
Right.
So there's lots of strands of that, and trying to pull all that together was quite a challenge.
I can imagine. And I also found it appealing that there's some of these movies like Death by Hanging or Black Girl that kind of show how the way in which society is built, and how it is almost like violence towards the individuals.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
I found that really fascinating, the way in which that was done by different filmmakers in different ways. And one thing I love, Gian Maria Valeria, and I'm sure you do as well, because I know you like.
I mean, Volonte.
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry,
love
I always get
Volonte.
his
No,
name
it's right.
wrong for some
Yeah, it's all
reason.
right. So many names. Volonte, the spirit animal of the book. Sam and I definitely agree. The spirit
Yes,
animal of our book.
absolutely, and he's in so many of these movies. I mean,
Yeah.
so
Well, look,
I'm, and I knew very little about him, and I was reading. He's a fascinating person, and was also. I mean, he pretty much was a communist, right?
he was a
Yeah,
committed, very much a committed
yeah,
leftist. With links to, I don't think to the Italian Communist Party, but to one of the communist offshoots. Interestingly, I mean, somewhere on the web, there is a page for a documentary project about Volonte, but I don't think it ever
really.
got off the ground, which
Oh,
is
that would be interesting.
more of the pity.
Yeah,
But he's in so many of the
so many.
great, yeah. But also, I suppose, and that was the other tension in the book. We could have just made the book about Europe, frankly.
Yeah, true.
And within that, we actually could have just done Italy.
Italy, yeah.
There is so much, because there's so much going on, in Italy at this stage,
Yes.
and so many films coming out that reflect these themes that we
Yes.
wanted to tackle in the book, about solidarity with what's going on in Vietnam, with political upsurge, the war around Vietnam, and of course the particular Italian specific nature of that conflict, that was that Cold War conflict that was happening in the late 1960s and 1970s and 1980s.
Right, right. But the one of the films that probably one of my favorite films in the book that I'd heard about it before, but I watched it. Working Class Goes to Heaven with Volonte. It's got this, and I know you and Sam were saying this on another podcast, and I don't think I would have picked up on this, and if I hadn't heard the two of you say this, because at the end of that film, his character talks about having, they work in this factory, and they're the union fighting for better wages, and he says to all his coworkers, oh, I had this dream the other night that we were trapped behind this. I'm not sure if I have this exactly, if I'm remembering exactly right, but talking about coming from behind a wall, and everybody was in a fog. And he talks about how they were all in a fog, and it for me it sounded as if, like, yeah, like, if you win the fight, do they necessarily know what they want after that? I mean, other than wages, and of course, I was really fascinated by that. I think that's what I took from it, and so I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about, I mean, are there any films that came to mind that kind of explored, maybe people having the right ideas in mind, having the things in the right place, but not necessarily knowing exactly how they wanted things to shape up after?
Oh, so many. I mean,
Yeah.
most of those films that Kimberly does in her essay on,
The
campus,
States? Yeah.
the films about campus
Campus, right.
protest upsurge in the United States in the late 60s and 90s, are all like that.
That's true. Yeah.
Where, I mean, Zabriskie Point.
I was just thinking, yeah.
which is a great film, and
Really, I agree.
and a film that I actually didn't really like, but then I watched it again for this book, and I thought, oh, that is really good. That's really interesting. Beautiful film as well. But that's a classic of those young people fighting. But what are they actually fighting for?
Right.
I mean, I think that it also has a resonance in Italy, in particular. I think one of the chapters I did in the book was about how poliziotteschi films reflect certain political violence that's going on in Italian society in the 1960s and 1970s during the years of lead.
Yeah.
And there's a particular strand of poliziotteschi films which I would call sort of conspiracy poliziotteschi. And they're all about that. They basically take the essential formula of the Poliziotteschi, which is your lone male maverick cop who's doing his job, and in the process of doing his job, he stumbles upon a sort of shadowy right-wing conspiracy that is trying to overthrow the democratic order in Italy. And this, I suppose, reflects very much, and I think, films like The Working Class Go to Heaven and so many other of the Italian films link into that. It links into that really incorporeal, grey, politically confused period, which was the years of led. I mean, that's essentially bookended by two events. I mean, that's a political conflict, in a sense, a low-level civil war that's going on in Italy between the left and the right.
Right.
In the 60s, 1970s, and all the way into the 1980s. And it's sort of bookended, and it has its links in events in World War II and post-World War II. It's linked by these two events: the Piazza Fontana bombing. I think it's Fontana bombing in December 1969, which is a bombing of an agricultural bank, kills a whole lot of people. Initially blamed on the left, and then very quickly the media uncover the fact that it's far right extremists that have done the bombing. And then I suppose in 1978 there's the kidnapping by the Red Brigades of Aldo Moro. And and they subsequently kill him.
And there's a whole movie on that as well.
There's actually a Gian Maria Volonte film.
That's right.
Toto Moro.
Yeah.
Based on a Leonardo Sciascia book called One from the Other, I think. And Sciascia, and there's also and if I'm not mistaken, Volonte, bless him, is also in the adaptation of Sciascia's The Aldo Moro Affair, which is a sort of look at the kidnapping and the events around it. But I mean, what's really interesting about those two political events is, despite how nation-defining, how politically significant they were in Italy in the late in the 1960s and the 1970s, there's no consensus about actually what happened in those events at all. Like, even though it's the media reasonably uncovered that that it had been this far-right group called the New Order. And the New Order was part of this right-wing network that was worried about the direction that Italian society was going in. And so they staged what was sort of called a strategy of tension. And their strategy was a sort of series of provocations. And their aim was that they would just basically beat down the public, get them wary, and essentially sow chaos, and the public would start wanting a more wanting more order, wanting to bring back essentially a fascist state. And of course, at the same time, then you've also got a wing of the Italian student movement that's disillusioned by what's going on, and they sort of morph into one of there were several of them, several sort of student guerrilla groups that are going, that are urban guerrilla groups that are, the Red Brigades, which is the most popular. So even though there's agreement around that, there's agreement that the right kind of did the Plaza Fontana bombing, much like there's agreement that the Red Brigades killed Aldo Moro. All the circumstances around those events, are completely unclear, and no one's ever really agreed on them. And so there's this murky, paranoid air, and these conspiracy Poliziotteschi capture that really well, because the conspiracies are never defined. They're always shadowy. Your hard-charging Italian Poliziotteschi cops, they always uncover the flunkies, the hitmen, the informers, but they never really get to the top of the investigation and never get to the top of the conspiracy.
Right.
And I think, that reflects that period really, really well in Italy. I mean, my favourite of those films, we talked about very briefly about this, I think, in an email that we had. One of my favourite of that is Damiano's I Am Afraid.
Yeah, I saw that one. Yeah, really good.
1977.
Yeah.
Again, Volonte again playing this grizzled police detective who's assigned to sort of bodyguard this magistrate who's investigating what seems like just a sort of communal garden murder. and then it starts to become really clear that actually the murder is involved with right-wing terrorism.
Right.
And then the judge, I'm not giving any I won't give spoilers away about the end, but it's no spoiler to say the judge gets the magistrate that Volonte's character is bodyguarding is murdered.
Yeah.
And so there's a new investigator brought on board. But I mean, I suppose
that surprised me because I thought, we're only like 40 minutes in and the co-star's already gone.
Yeah. And of course,
Erland Josephson.
the character that Volonte plays too, this guy called Graziano, he's a cop, really disillusioned with politics. He's been injured in some sort of demonstration, doing his job in the middle of some sort of political demonstration. It's not clear whether it's the right or the left that did the demonstration. But I mean, essentially what I really like about that film, and it's the clearest, and it's a sort of Poliziotteschi adjacent, whatever. Let's not split hairs about that stuff now. But it's literally about a man who is driven mad.
Yes.
By the confusion and the obfuscation and the lies and the paranoia that is going on in Italian society in the 1970s.
And he gets really scared too. Like you don't really see that.
He's actually terrified because he says he's not sure. I can't remember their names off the top of my head. He's not your tough guy, Poliziotteschi cop. Your Luke Murata. He's not one of those kind of guys. He's, as I say, he's been injured. He takes his bodyguarding role as a kind of a bit of a step down from his direct investigatory role that he was doing. He's in a relationship with a left-wing student, but that's kind of a bit shaky. He's a bit of a shaky old guy, and he's terrified. He doesn't want to be a hero in this. He doesn't want to get involved in this. And when the magistrate gets killed, he goes, "Oh God, Christ, I'm in the middle of this. I'm in the middle of this conspiracy," and no one will believe him because, of course, that's the other key aspect. And I know I've spent a bit of time on these Poliziotteschi.
No. Go ahead.
They are fascinating. That's another of the key tropes of these Poliziotteschi conspiracy theories is that these cops unearth a right-wing conspiracy or sort of uncover or pull at the thread, start to pull at the thread of a right-wing conspiracy, but none of their superiors will believe them. No one will believe them. And they've always got, I think it's Mario Adorf in I Am Afraid, but they've always got some really straight-laced senior cop breathing down their neck who's telling them they've got to do their job by the book.
Right.
While, people are being killed and these right-wing terrorists are sort of running around the place, killing people and causing mayhem, and they're under pressure to get results, but they're also being told, hey, but do it by the book. Do it by the book. We don't want any mavericks in this.
Right, of course. Yeah.
And then that often gives way, and that often gives way to further layers of conspiracy, because often these cops, I'm not saying this in the context of I Am Afraid, but in some of these other Poliziotteschi conspiracies films, the senior cops are involved in the conspiracy, or the cop that is investigating the conspiracy's best police friend is involved, or you can't trust anyone. They're just but they really reflect that murky, undecided miasma of politics in 1970s Italy.
They also I don't know if anyone actually specifically mentioned. I mean, I know Fassbinder was open that he loved film noir, he loved classic Hollywood, and you see that in his movies. But the Italian ones, like I Am Afraid, they also felt very noir to me. I don't know if anyone ever mentioned that was like a direct influence on these and on the Poliziotteschi films.
Look, all those guys. I mean, as I'm sure you've covered on your show before, post-World War, after the end of World War II, the end of the Nazi occupation, as is the case in France, and I presume as is the case throughout all of Western Europe, there's this massive dump of, culture, of American culture on these countries, Italy, West Germany, France, and of course, amongst that dump is a lot of film noir. So these guys are all seeing film noir. I mean, I didn't unearth anything that says that film noir is a direct influence. But certainly the polizioteschi are influenced certainly by Melville. So they're influenced by American films, like, you know, I mean, and lots has been made of how a lot of them are sort of homages or pastiches of The French Connection or Dirty Harry, I mean, which is on one level true, but they're also, these Italian directors are also influenced by people like Jean-Pierre Melville, his films as well. Obviously, Melville's very influenced by film noir.
Certainly,
that's there. And moving out of Italy for you know, I mean, you see one of the films that I discovered. Sam brought it into the book, so you know, no one discovers a film. The films are out there; people have seen them. I don't mean it like that, but one of the films that Sam brought to our attention when she was looking at Yacef Chanaf, that an Egyptian director, is a 1958 film called Cairo Station.
Yes.
Which is sort of about labour unrest and political corruption around the central train station in Cairo. There's also there's a murder plot. There's a lot of stuff in that film. Very film noir. Film noir.
Oh, okay. I mean, I didn't see that one yet, but I have it on my list.
And Chanaf did this huge number of films in Egypt.
Right.
And, you know, we don't, you know, he's only just starting to be reappraised in that respect. And I mean, that the film I mentioned earlier, the Algerian film that Chanaf did was Jamila the Algerian, 1958, and that actually is a film about a young woman in during the Algerian struggle for independence, and she sort of gets politicized and becomes an FLN militant, and it's based on a real life character, a real life female character who is working for the FLN, and she's played by an actress that was in 60 films.
Oh wow!
You know, there's other. I went through just because I was fascinated by this. I went through the characters, the actors who played various roles in Jamila the Algerian. Fascinating film because it's a film about the war in Algeria, made in 1958, so the war's still going on, made in Egypt, made by an Egyptian director, very much as a sort of, I think, propaganda, not propaganda film, but, you know, very much a political statement film about, you know, we support in the war in Algeria. It's also got comedy. It's also got some dance numbers in it. There's intrigue. There's a romance between Jamila and another senior FLN commander. It's got everything. But I was kind of fascinated by this film, and because Sam and I did an episode of her podcast just about the Algerian films in the book, or the films in the book that deal with the war in Algeria. And I was just looking at some of the main characters main actors who are in Jamila the Algerian. You know, some of these guys are clocking up 80 films. Wow. I'd never heard of them. You know,
right? It's fascinating stuff, and you know, another film that I know you because I know you're a big Pontecorvo fan, of course, and your great essay on him. And I hadn't seen Operation Orgo. Is it? I think it's Orgo. I believe.
I think I mispronounce it because I say Ogro, but it's Orgo. Yeah. It might be Ogro. I don't know.
Okay, yeah, I was trying to figure that out, but that was fantastic. And of course, there's Volonte again. You know, and
there's Volonte.
You know, it's amazing he's such a good actor. You know, he could go from investigation of a citizen above suspicion and be this corrupt cop, and then working class go to heaven and be this really blue collar worker, and then be a cop. And he's always, it almost seems like he's a different person. I mean, and it's not as though he's doing a lot of makeup or changing his voice. I mean, it's very subtle, just the way in which he behaves. But that film was so powerful. I mean, that ending was so sad, and you see the tears in his eyes just because that guy just wasn't patient enough for things to change, and then he kind of snapped, and then he gets shot, and he's dying in the hospital, and when they're all sort of banded around each other, it's so that to me was sort of another example of they put so much heart and soul in changing things, but then sort of later it all went downhill just because the guy expected everything to be immediate, which is never,
Yeah, some of the, I mean, it's worth, I mean, as I said, Pontecorvo was one of the people we couldn't do this book without doing a decent essay on Pontecorvo. And he's essentially he's only made 5 films.
Yeah.
Of which there's four that I do in the essay. There's Capo in 1960.
Capo is really good. Yeah.
Battle of Algiers, 66. Burn,
yeah.
1969, and Operation OGRE in 1979. And those 4 films, and Pontecorvo's career through those 4 films is really interesting because he, maybe more than any other director in the book potentially, his films are just overtly a discussion about political violence.
Yes, yeah.
How you do political violence, when it's justified, when it's not, how it works, the dynamics of it, the impacts of it, the different contexts of it. So he starts off in Capo in 1960, which is about political resistance in a Nazi concentration camp. I mean, very controversial film, but I think it's a great film. And then he does Battle of Algiers, huge hit. Burn, which is his kind of weird, well, I classify it as his kind of weird sort of semi-exploitation, semi-art house film, very much riffing off what's going on in Vietnam.
Brando, that was actually Brando's favorite film.
Brando playing
right. Yeah. And for Brando to say that he even had a favorite because he trashed everything in Hollywood, for him to say he was even fond of one thing he was in is a big deal.
Yeah, well, Brando playing a British mercenary who's basically employed to go to a Caribbean sugar-producing island and take control of the island for the British. But the film is also about. I mean, it's a cipher for Vietnam, but it's also about one of Pontecorvo's fascinations, which was the work of Frantz Fanon. Of course, Frantz Fanon, The Wretched of the Earth, and Fanon doing a lot of work about the psychology of colonisation and how you remove the psychology of colonisation. And Burn is very much exploring that theme. And then he's not doing another, Pontecorvo's not doing another film for 10 years, and then he does Operation OGRE, which I think is his least known film. And I agree with you. It's actually my favourite Pontecorvo film, and it's a sort of drama.
I like it a lot.
Drama documentary, and it's essentially based on a real-life event, which is when members of the separatist Spanish organisation, Basque separatist organisation ETA, in 1973, they assassinate the then ailing Franco's second-in-command, a guy called Luis Carrillo Blanco, who was known as the OGRE. And Blanco is being set up. They can see Blanco's being set up to take the reins from as I say, the ailing Franco, and so they assassinate this guy. But it's you look at Battle of Algiers, and Volonte is one of the group of ETA people who are going to who do the assassination, and then there's a sort of dual time frame in the film.
Yeah.
So there's the assassination during the what we now know as the tail end of the Franco period in Spain, and then there's a period it bounces between that period and this period after, where the sort of members of the ETA group that killed Blanco have gone their separate ways. Volonte's character has become a sort of parliamentarian, a Basque parliamentarian who believes in a sort of peaceful road to political change. And one of the other people has remained very much in the shadows as a sort of political terrorist, believes that we've got to take this by violence.
Right.
It's you look at what a joyful film. I mean, it's got some very serious themes in it, and it's got some very pointed political violence in it. But Battle of Algiers is an expansive, at times joyous, really celebratory, large, fast-moving film. Really captures that spirit of 1966. Things are changing, and it captures out what's going on in Algiers, and it captures the ferment of what's happening during that war in Algeria.
Yeah.
And then Operation OGRE is very claustrophobic, and in fact, even parts of the film are even in a tunnel that they're building to part of the assassination plot of Blanco. Very dour, questioning now. Oh, is this political? Is this extra? Is this parliamentary? Is this urban guerrilla violence really the way to go?
Right, the doubts they have, which I really, because you don't often see that in enough political films. And I thought that's really, because I would imagine people, of course, we all have doubts about everything. You're going to do something like that, there's got to be doubts. Well,
that's also captures what's going on, and that looking at that broad period we cover, the 60s, the upsurge in the late 60s. That upsurge starts to sort of peter out. Oh, it doesn't peter out. It takes other forms, but that sense of global revolutionary change that you see in 68 starts to sort of die down. And then certainly in Europe, what you have is, we talked about Italy, where there's a sort of strategy of tension, where the right and the left are in this shadowy guerrilla war with each other.
Right.
And so post 75 is when the Franco regime falls.
That's right. Yeah.
And this was something I didn't realise, because there's another film that's covered in the book called 7 Days in January, which is a Spanish film that looks at this period. The period directly after the downfall of Franco, of course, the fascist elements in the political apparatus, big business, the military, they don't want a bar of this democracy, and they're trying to sabotage it. And they embark on their own strategy of tension in Spain to try and sabotage the nascent democracy that's come into being after Franco's been overthrown. I think Operation OGRE is 79, so it's in that period of the strategy of tension in Spain, and also Pontecorvo can see what's going on in his own home country of Italy. Also, the same is going on in there's a similar thing going on to some degree in France, and he's going, well, look, these democracies, that the right is trying to sabotage these democracies. Is this is extra parliamentary urban guerrilla political violence really the best thing that we can do now to preserve these democracies? So that film is a real debate about that. As you say, it's a fascinating film. And of course, what's also happening too is that, as I touched on earlier, those aspects of the student movements, they're getting desperate as well. So they're forming their own sort of urban guerrilla groups, the Bader-Meinhof, the Red Brigades, etc.
Yes.
And embarking on their own sort of spree of kidnapping and extra parliamentary violence, and they're desperate for political change as well.
Mm-hmm. Is there any indication as to why he only made 5 films, Pontecorvo?
No, I don't know. That's a really interesting question.
Yeah.
No, I don't know. I mean, I think he made a lot of documentaries.
That's true.
He made things in between those 4 films. Yeah, it's a really good question. I didn't.
Yeah. I'd love to know. The only one I haven't seen is the one he did with Yves Montand. I haven't seen that one.
That's the first one.
That's his. Oh, is that his first one? Okay.
I believe that is his first one.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
I was thinking Battle of Algiers.
Good film, but very different to the 4 that followed.
Right. Yeah. And one thing that you talked about in the essay, which was really surprising to me, was that people use Battle of Algiers as like a blueprint
totally.
to how to start a revolution, and then on the other side how to stop it, because you do see both sides in the film, which I love. I mean, that's a perfect film to me. I mean, it's so powerful. But you're right, has more of that celebratory, energy, whereas the other one is very somber, very calculated,
Very much so.
A lot of the doubts. I didn't get a chance to see. I wanted to watch Robert Kramer's Ice because I know you wrote about Ice,
Yep.
and you had mentioned that the characters also start to have doubts about what they're doing. It's interesting because the only reason I know of Kramer is because I like the writings of Ray Carney on Cassavetes, and on his website he has a list of filmmakers he recommends, and a lot of Kramer's movies are on there. So I got to dive more into his work. How did you come to hear about him?
As I said, we were very keen. There were certain films and directors that we had to include in this book. In terms of American films, Kimberly Lindbergh's essay covers off on a whole lot of the sort of, I suppose, better known films.
Right.
Little Murders, Zabriskie Point, stuff like that.
Yeah.
I was just digging around to see what else was out there. I mean, there's a great essay in the book on The Spook Who Sat by the Door. I think that's 1970.
That was another one. I didn't get a chance to get to it, but that looks really good. So I'll have to see.
It's a really interesting film that was sort of from a black revolutionary point of view. But I mean, Kramer, I'd heard of Ice, and I'd heard of Kramer, and Kramer had done quite a few films, and I just couldn't seem to find them anyway. Of course, one person who did review the book, Jay Hoberman in Sight and Sound, who in an otherwise very positive review said, because I think I said in my piece, Kramer's films are really hard to find, but of course he said, such and such film label in France has had them out for ages, and I thought, well, as if I'd know that and be able to access those, but
one country,
whatever. Kramer was part of the New Left, part of a group in the New Left, part of, I suppose, this New Left outfit that was sort of saw itself as the sort of documentary branch of the New Left, made documentaries, brought documentaries out from Vietnam and Cuba to show in America, made radical films, made a whole lot of radical films. They are quite hard to see.
Mm-hmm.
And the one I sort of picked was Ice, which is essentially about this student uprising in America.
Yeah.
Because Ice is when? Ice is 1970.
70, I think, yeah.
Quite a didactic, strange film. But interesting because, again, anyone who spent time in left-wing political student movements, as I have, will recognise the characters in Ice. We'll recognise the event, and we'll recognise things in Ice, like your doubts and the workload,
right,
the logistics, never having enough money,
right,
and then you transpose that onto a revolution. I mean, and there's all this talk in Ice about, well, we've got to get guns, and if we get guns and we have this revolution, where do we put the wounded, and what do we do, and how do we prevent?
It's the procedures that go.
It's the organisation.
Yeah, there's almost something funny about that.
and then there's also people having doubts and having fears, and then there's characters. There's the weird characters that these often left-wing movements attract, and how they may be crucial, doing a really important job, but they're really difficult to deal with, and how you deal with that person. Ice is all about that. It's a lot of influences in Ice. I mean, I think there's very much a sort of French New Wave feel. There's also some direct influence back to films like Eisenstein's 10 Days That Shook the World, and things like that, where there's doing these little sort of scenes where they're using this mechanical dinosaur as a sort of to represent imperialism on a map of the world and all that kind of stuff. And then they've got to captions, much like Eisenstein did in October, 10 Days That Shook the World. Really, really interesting film. But I mean, of course, then you're going into the 70s, that wave of, at least, I mean, people start working for change through political institutions much more, that wave of political upsurge, maybe people think it's starting to recede, so people are getting more desperate, and they're doing things like setting up the weathermen, and they're setting up urban guerrilla groups, and they're doing this kind of stuff as well. So
Right.
ICE is a kind of example of that, maybe.
I'm looking forward to seeing that one because it sounds really, really good. But you just mentioned something which I found as well, that, I mean, there's a number of these that are, well known and popular that people can find, but a lot of these are hard to find. Some of them are just, and I never say this because I hate to talk about, like, stuff that people upload on YouTube for free, but in some cases, it's the only way you could see some of these. Yeah, it's like,
oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Or people have uploaded them.
Yeah, this book would have been impossible without YouTube.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, you're looking at one of the. So I did an outtake on the cinema of Argentina, talking about the dirty war that went on in Argentina, and Jesus Christ, was that ever dirty? But if you want a country where the military literally go to war against their own people, but there's a particular film called Traitors, Raimondo Glazer. Traitors, 1973, which is this incredibly complicated, dense film about trade union politics in Argentina in the lead up to the dirty war in Argentina. I mean, it's been shown in festivals, and I think some of Glazier's work's been put out on DVD. I certainly couldn't. The only place I could find it was YouTube.
It's I can't help but wonder. I mean, this probably may be difficult to even answer, but I wonder why so many of these have not been put on Blu-ray or DVD. I mean, there's millions of movies we can't. There's not everything has been restored yet. But even something like I Am Afraid, maybe in Italy you could find it, but I was like, I'm surprised this is not already out, easier to access. But hopefully more and more of these will come out. But you sent me this great list that you made on Letterboxd, which has every single movie that is listed in the film. So I could share that if people want to find some of the movies. But of course, from reading the book, you can learn so much more about them and pick and choose from there. Were there any first time viewings here that you really love, that you, from researching and doing the book, that you hadn't seen before?
Definitely. But before I get to that, though, I mean, you're right about that. A lot of the films are not well known, but it's also, a lot of them are having a moment too. I mean, I think that it's interesting. So the book obviously plugged into a bit of a zeitgeist that's going on. Our book plugged into a bit of a zeitgeist that's going on because of, I know that Criterion did a big season of the Yacef Deighan's films, and I mean, some of the African directors. Samm Deighan, he's one that we do in the book. I know that his films. I mean, his films were showing at Melbourne Cinematheque. So I mean, that was not Melbourne Cinematheque, but at the Melbourne ACME, the Australian Centre for the Moving Image. The Spook Who Sat by the Door, which is a really important 1973 film, which is another quite personal essay by a really good writer called Michael Gonzalez. I think that's recently had its own restoration, and is now getting its dues as a really important sort of film of the early 1970s in America. So it swings and roundabouts, Right. What did I really like? Well, Cairo Station, I Am Afraid, OGRE was one. That film I really enjoyed, 7 Days in January. That's 1979. That was a film by a sort of director who had links to the Communist Party, the then outlawed Communist Party in Spain, or it had recently been legalised after Franco fell. And I really enjoyed that. Juan Antonio Bardem. And yes, apparently he is related to Javier Bardem.
Oh wow! I didn't know that.
That's a sort of film that looks at that right-wing strategy of tension,
right,
in Spain in the late 1970s. Based on a real event. Group of right-wing militants break into a trade union office and kill about 9 people. And hoping that, and they do that because they hope that that the left will overreact, and it'll give them the pretext to basically take back power. But the left don't overreact. And it's the film that the story, the break-in is told through the killings is told through the eyes of this young, very naive member of a prominent right-wing family. That was a really interesting film. There's a film, I think it's 1983, called Born in Flames.
Oh yeah,
Lizzie Borden, American film.
Yeah.
Just a really interesting.
That was on the Sight and Sound list from a couple of years ago. Yeah,
and that's a very well known film, but I had not seen it.
Yeah, right.
Love that film. Just joyous, great sound, great soundtrack. Really interesting.
That's one I still have to see. I still got to see that one.
Really recommend Born in Flames. The other film I like that I saw for the first time, so I do like Lino Brocca. He's a Filipino director. He was a gay Filipino director, which is
Criterion
no
have some of his movies. The Criterion Channel. Is it Manila in the Claws? He did that, right?
Manila in the Claws of Light is his most famous film about a young guy from a rural region who comes to Manila to find his love, who's been trafficked into sexual slavery. Pretty hardcore film. Right. There's another film though which I had seen that, but one of the films I had not seen was a film called Macho Dancer, which is about set in the world of these it's set in the world of these men who basically work in this club, this dancing club, but also there's unofficial sort of prostitution for mainly white expatriate males in the Philippines. And it's all about police harassment of these people, and there's this particular cop that is doing terrible things, and one of the macho dancer. A couple of the macho dancers team up. They're called macho dancers. Team up to sort of find a woman who's been taken away and has been trafficked into prostitution by this particularly venal cop who they decide that they then want to get revenge on. Great film. Brocca's really interesting. Really, I mean, and again, Brocca did so much work. Started doing the equivalent of craft theatre in the Philippines, doing these these little dramas for Filipino television, these romantic dramas, and then using much like Costas Gavras, using popular forms to talk about political issues, right? Which is I really like. Yeah. So they were all sort of first-time watchers, but I mean, so many films. I mean, a number of the films that I covered in that chapter on Italian conspiracy polizioteschi, they were all first-time watchers. Illustrious Corpses. That was a film I watched as a first-time watch. That was a great film. I mean, it's lots, so many. And I mean, I've been working through some of the films, particularly in the West German chapter that Samm did.
Oh yeah, that was great.
The Lost Honor of Katharina Blum.
I love that one. That was great. I didn't
see it for the book, but I recently watched a sort of film which is a kind of male equivalent of The Lost Honor of Katharina Blum, which is called A Knife in the Head. Oh yeah, West German film, terrific film. Anyway, lots of film.
That's on my watch list is huge.
Okay.
There's so many. I mean, I like I said, I saw some, but there's so many. There's also a list that Andrew put out on crimereads.com. His 10 favorite films of political violence and revolution from the book. So I will put that in the description box, and of course, like I mentioned, the letterbox as well. Where would you? Because I hate to just tell people to go to places like Amazon, especially nowadays. But where if people want to get the book, where would you suggest people go?
They can get it from the publisher, PM Press.
Okay.
I know it's been out for a while. It's been out for a little while now, so It's in a lot of bookstores. Yes, Amazon, all the online platforms are also selling it. So it's fairly easily attainable.
Great, fantastic. And if people want to follow you on social media or anywhere on the web, where's the best place for them to go?
Can they follow me on social media? They can. I'm on Instagram as Andrew Nette, and I'm on Blue Sky as Pop Curry.
Great. Fantastic. Well, I'll leave the links as well as Andrew's social media links in the description box, and Samm Deighan as well.
And of course,
She's great.
As you mentioned, I did do a list of every single film that's name checked in the book, and that's
the letterbox.
That's in my Letterboxd account.
Yeah, so I'll leave that.
And I haven't seen them all. Anyone who says that they've seen them all is lying.
Yeah, there's no way. You need a few years.
No way they could do it. Yeah.
So I'll leave all of that.
The book, and I haven't seen them all.
Right. So, Yeah. Well, there you go. So again, that will all be in the description box below.
Wonderful.
Andrew, thank you so much for your generous answers and details. And this was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot and discovered a hell of a lot of good films and more to come. So I hope you could come back sometime down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I enjoyed it. That was great. Thank you for having me.
Anytime. And thank you all so much for watching. I want to thank all of my members on Patreon. If you're interested in becoming a member of my Patreon, head over to the link, patreon.com/Robert Bellissimo at the movies for full details. You can also leave a donation, or what I call a tip, by clicking the thanks link, which you will find directly below the video frame. Just click on that and you can leave a donation if you choose to. Of course, I would greatly appreciate that. And lastly, if this is your first time here, please consider subscribing. It is absolutely free to do so. By pressing the Robert Bellissimo at the movie logo, you will see it floating above my head in the top left corner to your top left. In just a second, just click on that. And then click the bell in order to get a notification every time I release one of my new videos. I would also really appreciate if you leave a comment, share the video, like the video. All of these things create traction onto my YouTube channel and really help share the video far and wide, and the channel in general. So thank you so much for doing that, and I will see you all in the next one.